Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences, working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss. Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Claire.
And I'm Ruth. And today we're going to do a listener mail episode. But before we do that, Claire, how was your week?
My week was good. I wanted to bring up a TV show that Ralph and I have been enjoying, and I wonder if you've watched it with your kids, because it is a kids show, and if you haven't, I recommend it. Anyway, it's called Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts. Do you know it?
No, but it has been recommended to me, and they watched the trailer about 5 times, and we're very excited. Okay, cool. Tell me about it.
Well, it's really fun. It's about like this futuristic society where there's all these, well, they're wonder beasts, I guess. They're mutes, they're called. And so they're these big animals. And so the humans have kind of retreated to living underground, but then the main character ends up being above ground, and she has to survive with these cool creatures. And it's really fun. And the main character is super energetic and positive and fun to be around.
Yes.
So we've really been enjoying it. We don't,
cool.
we're not watching it with kids. We're just watching ourselves, and it's still really fun. So I recommend it.
Okay, sweet. I'm gonna check it out with them. That's cool.
How was your week?
My week, it's kind of funny. I feel like I'm coming up to this period of time where it is St. Patrick's Day over here, and it makes me it's like a struggle to honestly. So it definitely makes me quite homesick, and it also. I think I have a student who is, her parents are Mexican, and she's like, oh, wait, is St. Patrick's Day like Cinco de Mayo is for us? Where I was like, yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of stereotypes floating around on that day. So it's definitely, yeah, I think it's funny. I always tell my students that in Ireland, we don't ever call it St. Patty's Day, like Patty. And so that's my bit of... educating
Call
people.
It St. Patrick's Day.
Okay, yeah.
Or
St. Paddy's with a D, because the Irish word for Patrick is Padraig. And anyway, so there's a whole thing. But
that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm definitely Ireland nostalgic, but I think it makes me reflect on the difference. It's different. Like an Irish American is a whole other culture that exists here. And so it's different. And yeah, it's just interesting, like which bits we belong to.
So what kinds of things would you do for St. Patrick's Day in Ireland?
Well, there's always a parade. And when I was a kid, we used to go to mass, and there's definitely shamrocks. But when I came here, I was really mortified because when I put my daughter into, like, she went to her daycare that day, and everyone was wearing green and bows. And I was like, oh, wow, I did not, like, she was the only kid who wasn't dressed up. And I was like, oh, man, we're really not doing the Irish thing right. So it was just very, it's just quite different. And
yeah.
And one mom like got up in the night and put all of her kids' stuffies in green t-shirts, and it's like, whoa, I am definitely have never heard of that before. And the pinching thing, I have never heard of pinching.
So we have totally non-Irish traditions here for St. Patrick's Day.
Well, and it's like, I guess it's this weird, you know, like in movies about time travel and there's all these timelines. Because like there's all these people here who've like their family's been here for 100 years and they've evolved this Irishness from that seed point. And then there's people who came 30 years ago and they've evolved their Irishness from that point. And like
that
even,
makes sense.
you know, I talk on here all the time about how it is in Ireland, and I really mean how it was in like 1996 when I started university. And so like I'm frozen at that point. So
that makes
it's kind
so
of
much sense. How interesting.
Yeah. I wonder, there you go. That's another research project for us. How people sort of express their Irishness. But anyway, so my quote today, it's nothing to do with education or professoring or really anything. So it's, but it is to do with being Irish. So I'm going with that. So
okay.
I think I shared with you before when I was talking to Hamlet. In Ireland, we have these huge state exams. And part of that is you study these old Irish poets. And so one of them is Patrick Kavanagh, is a really famous Irish poet who I love. And he has this poem, and it's talking about, it's like after he's died, how he would like to be remembered. Okay. And it's, oh, commemorate me where there is water, canal water preferably, so stilly, greeny at the heart of summer. And after, there's a kind of a famous canal in Dublin, and there's something about walking out along that canal during the summer is like quintessential being in Dublin, and they actually put a statue of him sitting on a park bench beside the canal afterwards, and so it's quite nice. But it's very evocative for me of being at home, so
That's nice.
I think I'm thinking about that.
Do you know if he was left in the canal?
Oh no! So I think they just put like a
Just a-
memorial to him beside,
a
yeah.
memorial.
And he used
That's
to
nice.
walk there a lot, and so yeah. I think for us, we're kind of coming up on 4 years since we've gone home, and
Oh,
so
wow.
I know, and we were meant to go last summer, and then all
Yeah.
the stuff. So I think, yeah,
I can see why it'd be especially nostalgic St. Patrick's Day.
yeah, for sure. But okay, tell me about. Have you told me? Yes. So what are we going to do?
So we're doing listener mail,
Mm-hmm.
and the first thing we have is from Stefan. And Stefan was telling us about the habit of treating everything like a problem to solve. Like motivating students is a problem to solve. Organizing course things is a problem to solve. Each lecture is a problem to solve. Research productivity, networking, scheduling, all of these are problems to solve. And how, while it's good to be reflective, not to the point where it takes the joy from teaching, and having all these problems can be really demoralizing. And so thinking about the concept of it being good to loosen up a bit and remember to enjoy the process of the job, rather than focusing on all these problems to work on. And so I thought that was really great concept that we wanted to reflect on the podcast.
I absolutely love this. I think that like reflection doesn't have to be about beating yourself with the stick all the time. And like what would happen if we maybe reflected on some things that we actually were doing quite well, or like felt good about, instead of this constant sort of striving to how we're going to improve and what's going to be better. And for sure. And I think I really appreciated his framing. And as soon as I read it, I was like, yes, exactly. But instead of, I don't know, like I think I've talked about this before, and people talk about having an asset-based approach. But so much of, I wonder how I can instill that in students when I have such a deficit mindset. Like I'm always just like
You're working on it.
Right. But it's like just always thinking about, what could we do to fix it? And also, someone told me the expression like good enough is good enough. And sometimes,
that's nice.
Maybe our whole ultimate goal isn't to become the most perfect teacher, researcher, tenure candidate, whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, it would be fine if we're just sort of existing and doing just fine.
Totally. And even if our goal is to be the best, we have to enjoy the process of getting there. Or at least that could be part of the goal. Maybe part of the goal is improve and enjoy the process. Or,
And I think, because we mentioned this a little bit in our interview that we did with Rachel, but thinking about, not necessarily the end product. And I think I'm so like, oh, it's going to feel so good.
Right.
Like a big thing I do is when I'm teaching a course for the first time, I'm like, oh, it's going to feel so good when I'm doing this for the second time. Like instead of just being like, woohoo, I'm doing this thing for the first time. And it feels really weird.
It can be exciting too. Yeah.
Yeah.
It made me think of, like one thing I was thinking of is my first reaction to reading Stefan's thought was, I actually want to be kind of more like that in thinking of, problem to solve, thinking of things as problems to solve. The emphasis on the word problem can be really demoralizing, but the emphasis on the word to solve is actually kind of empowering. And I think in a lot of ways, thinking of things of not necessarily problems, but as figure-outable, can be really helpful, not just dismissing them as, oh, this is just the way it is, but, maybe I could do something about that. So I kind of think it depends where everyone personally is at, whether they need to think about, don't worry about the problems and enjoy the process, or whether they need to think about, oh, maybe I could see this as something I could solve. Those are all useful things, and it kind of just depends on where we're all at.
How will we get the word problem out of there? I think you're right. Like, we're just like, because I think, but then even sometimes, no, I totally agree. But then also sometimes a little bit like good enough is good enough. Like sometimes you can be like,
exactly.
yeah, like
You need a
I
balance.
totally could make this better, but right now,
Right.
I'm doing this other thing, so this is fine for now. Or
Right.
and I'm
Totally.
yeah. And I actually wanted to throw in another thing that Stefan mentioned in a different section that was just about. I think I mentioned on the podcast about challenging students that I felt like it was like I was sort of embarrassed about having like a lady problem about aggressive people, and I really appreciated his acknowledgement that like violent dudes is like an everybody problem, and it's not, you know. And that was really really important to read, and I really appreciated the way he framed it. So that was excellent.
Totally. You know, another thing this reminds me of is a book, which I haven't read yet, but it's on my to-read list, which is Everything is Figure Outable.
Ooh.
By Michael Leo.
That's awesome.
I think I understand that one of the things is like, everything is figure outable. If you really want to figure it out, you can make it happen. But of course, it's going to take work. And so that's, I think, maybe where some of this balance comes in is we have all these things that we could list as problems to solve, but we don't have to solve all of them. And it's really demoralizing if we have this whole list of things that we have to solve.
I know.
But if instead we say, oh, I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to get all these things solved and maintain. I can solve the ones that I want to. I think that could be, I'm not sure exactly what the pithy phrase would be. Maybe it is everything is figure outable.
That sounds pretty good to me. And I think, yeah, and I like what you're saying because it's actually a choice. Because I think what happens is when we just feel like at the bottom of this big pile of criticisms,
big pile.
yeah, it's like really, but if you're actually like choosing what you're going to address, and I think you maybe have mentioned this about your active learning course with chemistry, and I think I had this experience with the AAPT, an American Association of Physics Teacher training workshop thing, and they were really like, please only pick one thing to implement because you will fall on your face if you try and do all of it. And
yes.
And I remember
have it be
even
a small, doable thing that you're going to actually be able to do. Yes, that I really appreciated that because it's so easy to be like, I'll revamp my whole class, and
I was secretly like, no, I think I'm going to do like 10 things, and then you're like, oh no, I can't. I have to really do whatever. Yeah.
And then I picked a really small thing to change, and then I was like, oh my goodness, this is a big thing.
Yeah, this is plenty. But yeah, I think it's so weird because, yeah, I think we can take all of these positive practices and then turn it into just a way to make yourself feel bad about yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a really good reminder that we should relax and enjoy the moment and the process and not have the weight of all these problems to be solved on us all the time.
Totally. And one thing that I feel like is a little bit missing for me in this period of time is context of what other people are doing.
Oh, yes.
So I think I'm just so like, oh, and I was like talking to someone, I was like, I didn't do this and this and this and this, and you know, and they were like, hey, so like, are you showing up to your Zoom times? And I was like, yeah, of course. And they're like, are you responding to student email? I was like, absolutely. And they were like, you're actually doing quite fine. And I was like, really? Oh, I just don't have that context anymore because, you know, like you used to have really easy check marks for being a successful. I mean, not really easy, but you know, if you went to class every day, if you got things, you know, but now it's a little bit more nebulous. So
sure, there's fewer established norms now. And so we can't rely on established norms to feel comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Our next email is from Darian, and it is mentioning something that really strikes fear into my heart and sort of dread, but it is about staying up with the literature in their field. And so just kind of feeling overwhelmed about that. And so the thing they were wondering is, how do you do that? How do you talk to students about staying on top of the literature, or how they should approach, you know, reading papers and stuff for research? And I also love that Darian made a prediction about what Claire's answer would be. And I was so excited that somebody did that and that they were correct. So it was even more exciting.
Yeah. And so the question was, do you find it difficult or impossible to stay on top of the developments in your areas? And if so, how do you manage the guilt of feeling like you shouldn't be doing new work if you haven't read old work? And Darian's predicted answer for me was, what is your intention in reading this literature? And ask that question. And then see based on what the answer is, that will tell you how to move forward. And That I do say that a lot, and I completely agree. It's all about what your intention is.
It's a good point. That's why.
Yes, yeah. I completely agree. What is the goal? And I kind of was thinking about this. What is my goal with reading the literature? And I was thinking there's a few different things. Like, I just feel like it's something I should do, in quotation marks. And then there's, I need to be prepared to talk with my colleagues about whatever papers have come out recently. And then there's also to best direct my research using the most up-to-date information. And that one seems like the most real one that I should be using, but all three of them are kind of floating around in my mind as potential goals. But if I do hone in on it's to best direct my research with the most up-to-date info, well, then maybe I can refine the list of papers that I want to read, and I bet it would get quite small if I really refined it to the ones that might actually impact what I'm working on right now. So at least a lot smaller than all the papers related to all the things that I've ever done, which is kind of what I usually think of it as. So that was really interesting to think about.
Yeah, I think for me, I've had such a roller coaster ride about my attitude to the literature. And I think like my first sort of relationship with reading papers was in grad school. And I think I just so wanted them to be like a textbook that would really teach me how to do this stuff. And they never were like that. But I was kind of like, if I read every paper, then I will feel confident proceeding with this work. And that didn't really happen. And I think I had an experience later in grad school where there was something I was actually trying to do, and it was just got stuck on it for so long. And then I finally found the piece of information, and it was in a paper I had already read and made copious notes on. But because I wasn't looking for that question when I read the paper, it didn't pop out at me. Do you know what I mean?
I see.
Part of me has absolved myself from keeping up with the literature in a way until I have a specific question. Like, I feel like for me, anything more than like just perusing a paper is kind of not very effective unless, kind of what you just said, like unless I have, what am I actually trying to do by reading this paper? So I think, and papers are not, I mean, they're not, like I always tell students this, like they aren't textbooks and they're not immensely readable. Like there's a lot condensed into each and every sentence. So, because I think at one point I had an approach of everything I encounter that I don't know, I'll go and look it up. And of course, like I didn't get out of the first paragraph then. And so like, it was just,
Oh, I see. Yeah. You read the first sentence and you're like, okay, got to go look up 5 things. And then you can move on to the second sentence. Yeah. You'd never get through the paper. Totally.
No. And then I think someone who, to me, always feels like a real hardcore physicist in our department. And he's worked on some research with me. And he was like, yeah, dude, I just look at the pictures. And I was like, you do? Like, oh my God, are you serious? And like, it was just very, I mean, I think he obviously like engages with it more than that. But he's like, well, that's where all the interesting information is. And it was like, I felt like liberated. Like I suddenly had permission to not read every word in the paper.
Totally. And I do think, the most important information is usually in the graphs. And I think you've said that's how you direct your students to read papers, is like focus on the figures, because that's usually what the paper's structured around. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
And I have had students say, well, I couldn't get past this bit because I didn't understand it. And I was like, you should just skip it. Just go ahead. And I think, and I wrote a grant a couple of years ago. And again, it was like all these papers that I had already looked at. But when I was actually digesting them for how do I write what people have previously done on this, it was such a different experience than just trying to read them. So I definitely don't think there's anything inherently wrong with reviewing papers. But I think harassing yourself and not feeling good if you're not doing it is sort of pointless.
I wanted to just share kind of my balance that I've landed on, and it's definitely on the not reading that many papers.
Okay, sweet. I want to hear. I was like, don't tell me I have to read papers, Claire. I don't want to hear.
So the times when I do read papers are when I'm writing a paper or when I'm writing a proposal, and of course I need all the current literature or the background information or that kind of thing. So that's the times when I do find myself, and in that point I'm not reading every single paper cover to cover. I'm reading to get the information that I need relevant to what I'm writing at the time. But when I'm not writing something and I'm just trying to stay up on the field, I feel satisfied, and I'm not sure that this is what everybody should do, but I don't feel like I get behind so I have ResearchGate set up to send me emails when somebody else publishes a paper that cites one of my papers, or if a co-author publishes new work. And so then whenever I get those emails, I just read the title and, the authors of the new published work. So I have a general idea what is happening. Most of the time, I just read the title and the authors, and I'm like, okay, now I know that happened. Mm-hmm. If it's a paper that cited one of my main few core papers, where, like that's the stuff that I'm working on right now, then I do go into this new paper and figure out where they cited me to read that context. But that's kind of the most that I end up doing when I'm not actually trying to
I have a
write
side
something.
question.
Yeah, what's that?
Have you ever gotten one of those and then you open the paper and they were like, this terrible paper claimed this thing, and like, has that ever happened?
That hasn't happened.
Okay.
I mean,
that would be exciting if someone was like picking a fight with you through their papers, but okay, sorry.
Usually they're just saying, we used the methods that so-and-so used, or, established methods, and list a few, and one of them's mine. But sometimes I have been pleased, like it's really exciting when they cite me and, paraphrase the paper and have accurately taken, the pith.
Yay, okay,
away.
so you did a good job.
That's pretty cool. And then I see, how they're using it and where they're going with that. And so that I do want to read that for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of my maintenance strategy, and it doesn't take that long. And I do feel like enough. It seems like most of the papers are on ResearchGate, so that I can get the information about whether there is a citation or not. So I can go look those papers up. And the last thing I had about that is I feel comfortable about that because I don't think that the new papers are likely to change the direction of my current research, because I don't know, research just takes so long. I have a plan, I'm working on it, I'm going to get the results, then I'm going to interpret them. It would have to be a pretty big paper related to my work very closely to make me change something. So I don't worry too much that I'm missing something in those interludes.
That's a really good point, because it's not like, I don't know, the really big projects like gravity waves and who's going to be the first person to sequence human DNA or whatever. Don't think I'm doing is like that, where it's going to be like, oh, well, I guess I'm not going to do that anymore because someone already got there first. So... Yeah. So I don't know. That's how I feel. I do find it impossible to stay up with the literature, and periodically I do feel guilty about it on and off. Yeah.
But I feel, when I'm thinking about it without too many emotions in my head, I feel comfortable about that maintenance level in between the papers and proposals. Yeah,
I think I've certainly settled on being a little lazy about papers, but it is something that's absolutely tormented me over the years. I've come to a self-acceptance, but I swear I had this one bloody stack of papers that I would
Did you just carry it around?
Oh my God, I would cycle home every night with that bag, big mound of papers on my back, and they would get so dog-eared, just from so it was not effective.
Yeah. My advisor, as a grad student, had his whole office stacked with papers, but he knew where they were. Yeah. He'd be like, "Oh, you want this one?" And he'd just go over to the stack,
Who
the third
are
of the way
those
down.
people?
Okay. It was amazing.
I know. I have I feel like I've had conversations with people who are like, "Oh, that thing. Oh, yeah, here it is. Here's this paper I read 50 years ago that I remember this paragraph." And you're like, "Whoa, that is not me at all." So, yeah. I mean, I guess one thing I could do. And I know other people have had this where maybe they have a document with sort of summaries of papers, but maybe I guess to have it in my head, I will write a grant someday about this and I will need this piece of information. But I think other than having a very specific goal, I'm not very good at engaging with the papers.
I suppose the other thing I do is I have a folder with relevant papers organized by last name and year, but then I do, if I say, oh, I'm interested in this one because it did XYZ thing, I'll put that in the document title so that I recognize it. If I do say, oh, didn't I see a paper about that? Then I can hopefully find it a little easier because I put the keywords of specifically what was relevant to me in the title. But I think a lot of other people have really cool organizing paper systems. Zotero and Mendeley and stuff, and I haven't
Yours
used any
sounds
of those
pretty, I
fancy
mean,
ones.
honestly, once again, I've sort of run into me not wanting to spend time on something, so I create huge problems for myself later on, where like I just randomly download papers and then they're all over my desktop, and then don't have them organized until I have to go write a grant, and then it's just, yeah. I applaud you, is what I'm saying. So I know like your system sounds pretty advanced to me, so I'm into
Well,
it.
I guess the conclusion is there's lots of workable systems, and I'm sure lots of people read way more papers than me. But Darian, I don't read very many papers, so maybe
Yeah,
that
but
will help you feel less guilty.
Right, and I'm super stoked that Darian wrote that email, because I actually have never even really talked to people about my paper issues, because I still feel a little bit ashamed about it. So it was really like, oh, okay. I was stoked to read that.
Totally.
Yeah, and especially the prediction of what Claire would say. That was super exciting. That was awesome. Cool.
Well, thanks so much, Stefan and Darian, for writing to us. And to all of our listeners, if you have any questions or thoughts on topics or anything, we would absolutely love to hear them. And you email us at contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, and if you ever have anything you want to email us about and you don't want us to talk about it on listener email, that is absolutely totally fine too. But do maybe make a little note in there.
All right. Well, thanks, Ruth. And thanks, Ralph.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows, or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know, if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.